Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it's written, God will command angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And the devil said to Jesus, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only God." Then the devil left Jesus, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. Jesus is underwater, chest tight from holding his breath, body heavy in the hands of his mentor, cousin, comrade John, who lifts him up out of the Jordan into the open air where he exhales, takes in a deep, gasping breath with shimmering droplets still clinging to his woolly hair, water beating luminescent on his dark skin, with the heaviness of his clothing floating around him in the river. The heavens break open. God's Spirit swoops down with the grace and precision of a dove in flight and rests on him. And a voice echoes in the sky with the words, "This is my child, my beloved." Words bigger than the cosmos, as intimate as a whisper, closer than a heartbeat. After this Spirit descends and perches on a still, soaking Jesus, after this voice rings out as he is still sparkling with the bits of light being reflected in the drops of water on his beard, after this legendary moment, a still, damp Jesus is led by this same Spirit who cascaded out of the clouds away from the river and out into the dry, arid desert where we meet him today. The story of Jesus in the wilderness is found in all three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Mark's version, we feel a little bit more of the urgency of the moment when Mark makes it clear that immediately the Spirit drove Jesus out from the water of the Jordan and into the wasteland. The geography of the Judean wilderness is marked by mountains and ravines and terraces and cliffs and dry riverbeds called wadis that only fill during flash floods. Today, we call that area the West Bank, a Palestinian territory under occupation that frequently faces water shutoffs arbitrarily at the hands of the state. If Jesus were to try to return to Galilee from that region today, he would face a wall, have to have the right papers, go through major checkpoints with armed guards. The Spirit led Jesus from the water of the Jordan River into this wilderness, the Judean desert. We know from our reading what awaits Jesus after 40 days out in the wilderness. Jesus will face down the devil. But it was the Spirit who sent him there. It was the Spirit who led him, who drove him into the wilderness where the devil was waiting for him. Why would the Spirit do this? Why would God send Jesus, God's beloved, into this place? I personally am disturbed by the idea that God tests us or leads us into temptation or somehow sets traps for us. And my time in community organizing has shown me that it is times of tension and discomfort that bring me clarity by rooting me in my identity and purpose and driving me forward. We call this intentional raising of tension agitation. Agitation in this sense is not just merely annoying someone. When it's done well, it's not shaming or bullying. Agitation is supposed to be grounded in deep relationship, where the parties know each other and trust is established. Agitation in these cases is done out of love, wanting to help people overcome the things that are holding them back. The Spirit sends Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted and to endure some hard questions, in part so that Jesus can get clear before starting his public ministry. Our conditioning has taught us to recoil from discomfort, to think of it as an inherently bad thing, something to sidestep or avoid at all costs. Instead of leaning into the tension to see what we can learn from it, we often try to evade it. But when we do this, when we turn away from tension, we fail to see the gift that this tension can be. We miss out on the clarity it brings with it and the opportunity to move forward. And the first thing that Jesus has to get clear about is his own identity. The devil begins this confrontation with Jesus by questioning who he is. The devil snakes some slippery self-doubt into Jesus's mind, hissing, "If you are the Son of God, if you are beloved." Remember that before this, Jesus had just been told in the river who he was. In Jesus' baptism, a voice from heaven claimed Jesus as God's child, as one dearly beloved. We receive this same promise in baptism. As baptized people, we are given the identity of one of God's beloved children, a part of God's own family, an identity that supersedes all other identities. And yet, like Jesus, we are often told by others and by the world that this isn't true and that God's promises couldn't possibly be for us. When the devil says to Jesus, "If you are beloved, if you are God's child," he's mocking Jesus. You, the son of a blue-collar worker, you, born of a questionable woman, you, a race crushed under the occupation of empire, you, denied citizenship, you, beloved by God, who do you think you are? But Jesus remembers that moment, the heavy, soaked robe, the glistening droplets, the Spirit fluttering down, the announcement from heaven, "You are my child, my beloved." It's Jesus' security in this identity, this clarity about who he is, that empowers him to face down the devil and win. The devil goes on to tempt Jesus with the sorts of things that many freedom fighters and leaders of liberation movements face. But they're the sorts of things that all baptized people face too, all throughout our baptismal journey. The devil starts by leveraging a fear of scarcity. You're hungry? Worried about feeding yourself and your family? Worried about providing for your physical needs? Many people never truly lean into discipleship because they let these very real fears be frozen. I know that a major barrier to my own discipleship is anxiety about mounting debt, about security for my children's future, about having a steady job with health insurance. Empires in Jesus's day and in our own keep the populace from rising up and fighting back by keeping us poor and hungry and desperate for bread. But Jesus rejects this fear and proclaims that humans need more than bread. We need the Word of God. We need truth and freedom and joy and beauty and art. We need to be focused on fulfilling our baptismal promises to work for justice and peace in the world, to dream of the world first birthed in us in these moments, and to build that world and not be intimidated into making our hopes smaller so that we can focus on the meager crumbs of survival. Next, the devil brought Jesus to the top of the temple and told him to throw himself down so that the angels would catch him. It would be a miraculous sign that would catch the attention of many. And Jesus was tempted to use this cheap gimmick to gain the attention of the masses instead of putting his head down and doing real, hard, grassroots work like building relationships. But Jesus was grounded in his identity as God's beloved, an identity affirmed to him in his baptism. Instead of using some contrived stunt or the force of his own charisma, Jesus chose to live among people, to love them as fellow children of God, to heal them and speak with them, and then to invite them into fully living into their identities as ones beloved by God too. Finally, Jesus was tempted to believe that the devil has controls of the nations of the world and that the devil could turn those over to Jesus if only Jesus would sell out. We face these same temptations too, to bow down to the false gods of capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and all of their empty promises. The devil was clever. He knew that Jesus was powerful, but Jesus had a choice. Would he use these powers that he had for selfish reasons, for ego, for money, or for fame? Or would he build power out of his own baptismal identity, out of his own sense of his belovedness, out of his devotion for the divine, and because of his great love for humanity? Ultimately, Jesus cast out the devil and sent him away. Jesus chose to make his mission about God and God's people and not about his own pride. Jesus gave up a glamorous pseudo movement based on his own glory and instead got clear about building a gritty, grassroots, ragtag family centered in God's vision of love and liberation. It was these crucial turning points where things got real for Jesus. He faced tension about his identity, about his motives, about his purpose, and he made decisions in the desert, rooted in the truth proclaimed to him in baptism. The stakes for Jesus here, they are high. After Jesus returns from this trying time in the desert, he learns that his comrade, cousin, mentor, John, the one who baptized him into this revolution of God's love and liberation for all people, John has been profiled, targeted, hauled off, arrested. He's sitting in a jail cell. This arrest, coupled with Jesus's clarity from his time of tension in the desert, leads to Jesus's radicalization in the beginning of his public ministry. Once Jesus is clear about who he is and what his purpose is, he's able to begin to build his community and to gather disciples. We just spent our own 40 days driven by the Spirit into the wilderness, exacerbated by social distance and quarantine. Lent is a season in our tradition where we disrupt our own comfort, our own routine, in order to gain some clarity about what's holding us back from loving God, loving ourselves, and our neighbor. We opt into this time of agitation during Lent, trusting that it will make us more sure and more grounded and more creative and more free. After just celebrating Easter, the stakes of our discipleship are clearer and clearer. The truth of the cost of this work that we are called to should make us feel tense. If it's not, we are not being honest about what lies before us as followers of a Christ executed on a cross. Our challenge then, now, is to remember our own identity as baptized children of God and to see that same belovedness in our neighbor and to dwell in the discomfort inherent in our baptismal journey throughout life, resisting the urge to turn away from it. Praise God that we do not do this hard work alone. We do it with Christ, our sibling, who journeys with us in the desert, who faces these very same trials in solidarity with us. We have the witness of the saints, our ancestors, the baptized people from every time and place who came before us, who beat down this path to show us the way and to let us know that we are not alone. We have the company of our community, our stories of liberation, our songs of freedom, marked here in this oasis with the waters of baptism and nourished by the meal of Christ's own body and blood. This community is where we draw strength to endure the hard questions of this life, to get ready for the coming reign of God's love and liberation on earth.